Okay, ja, baie dankie. En dan share screen. En hier is my. Okay, ek gaan nou net 'n bietjie groter stel. En ek gaan hom sommer so klik vanaand. Advanced lesson en ek sê dis vir my die belangrikste lesing hierdie want al die jare wat ons toetse doen met die elim het ek gesien in duisende toetse dat die probleem lê hierso by die meeste mense en ons weet daar's nou word baie daarvan gepraat en baie nagevors en so aan oor die verskillende microbiome en ons gaan vanaand so 'n bietjie daaroor gesels en dan het ek ook so expert se videoetjie hier op wat ek vir julle gaan wys wat julle nou kan kyk en dan wil ek hê as ons die video klaar gespeel het moet julle nie afgaan nie want ek wil graag hê ons moet 'n bietjie saam praat vanaand en ons moet gewoond word daaraan om dit so te maak vir die toekoms soos ons gevalle studies ook gaan doen. Okay, so hier gaan ons nommer 1 die gastric intestinal tract. So ons begin mos by die mond wat tande het en 'n tong en daar's 'n rede hoekom ons tande het. Want ons maag het nie tande nie, al die tande sit in ons mond. Mens ouer word dan word hulle 'n bietjie stomp en dan kan jy meer so dan moet jy meer kou as wat jy jonk is. So hoe as jy saam met die jare moet jy elke 10 jaar moet jy 10 keer meer bysit. So as die ander ou is 30 keer kou dan hou jy by 70 moet jy al sê omtrent 70 keer kou voordat jy dit insluk. Nee, grap maar net. Okay, so hier het ons al die glands wat die speeksel en die ensimes afskei onder die tong en daar het ons die submandibular gland, hulle is eintlik groot en daar het ons die parotid gland wat hier so by die ore sit. So die glands is baie groot en hulle is met 'n goeie rede daar want ons weet mos nou dat kaaps word in die mond afgebreek as jy dit kou, so word klaar omgesit in suikers. En die ensieme kom hier vanaf, maar daar's ook speeksel wat meng met die kosse en dan gaan dit nou af, dan sluk 'n ou dit nou en dan gaan dit met die esophagus af en ek dink baie mense het baie skade in die esophagus omdat hulle nie hulle kos goed kou nie, want hoe meer jy kou, hoe meer speeksel kom daar in die mond, deur hierdie kliere afgeskei. En as 'n ou nie goed kou nie, dan hou hulle op, jy weet, if you don't use it, you lose it. So dan moet jy van vooraf hierdie speekselkliere moet jy leer om af te skei. So dis 'n dissipline. Dis 'n eenvoudige ding, maar as ons dit nie doen nie, dan dis waar baie mense se spysvertering begin. En ek het na ander persone ook gekyk, 'n wetenskaplike wat dit genoem het. Jy weet, jy hoor nie baie keer dat mense dit praat nie. Ons in die natuurlike gesondheid praat baie daaroor, maar jy weet, so die esophagus wat afgaan in die maag, is baie keer gebrand deur suur wat opstoot en so aan. Dit weet ons en dan het ons die lewer, die duodenum, hierdie prentjies nou 'n bietjie in die pad hierso. Die galblaas, die jejunum, die ileum. Okay, die ileum is die laaste gedeelte van die dun darm, dan het ons die ascending colon wat aan die regterkant oploop. Cecum, hierdie laaste gedeelte voor hy uitgaan en daar sit die blinde darmpie, daar sit hy. En dan die maag hierdie kant, die pankreas, die transversale kolon, dan gaan hy afgaande kolon, sigmoid, daar sit hy kolon, en dan die rectum en die anus. So daar is die hele GI tract. En dit is belangrik, dis die belangrikste, ek sê dis die VIP system in ons is die voedingsskema hierdie. So dit is verskriklik belangrik en ons weet dat meeste siektes en hormonale probleme en tekorte, deficiencies, daai goed, kom alles uit hierdie GI tract. Right, so die eerste gedeelte na die maag is die duodenum. Dis hy hierso, daar's die pylorus, dit sal jy op die elim sien, jy kry pre-pyloric en dan kry jy pyloric, so hier's 'n klep hierso. En dan gaan die kos, wanneer dit klaar voorberei is, maak jy die klep oop en dan gaan dit hierso in die duodenum. En dis hier waar die pH weer terug verander van baie suur van minus tussen 2 en 4 pH na 6.5 en hoër, want aan die rande hierso sal julle sien daar vloei die bloed en dan hierdie is villi, dis haartjies en so aan wat hierso sit, die hele darm is vol van hulle. En dan hierso, daarso is die daar's 'n gaatjie daarso en dis waar die gal kom van bo af hier in en van die pankreas wat hierso sit, kom die pankreas ensieme wat help om die ander kosse te verteer soos die proteïene en so aan word hierso opgebreek en verteer. Dit is nog deel van die vertering hierso en opbreek van makro na mikro eienskappe. Goed, so dis hoe dit lyk. Die jejunem is natuurlik die langste deel van die dun darm en dis hoe hy lyk. Daar's hierdie villi die binnekant met mucosa is 'n ding wat hierso 'n gladderigheid hierso, submucosa en dan sien jy hierso is die capillaries, né? So hier kom die vuil bloed of hier kom die suiwer bloed, die suurstofryke bloed. En dan gaan dit in hier's 'n capillary. So wat die suurstofryke bloed gee dit neem die goeie goed hier op. En dan gaan dit in die bloedstroom in en die slegte goed word daar afgegee. Okay, so hier ook die goeie eienskappe word hier opgeneem met daardie. En dan gaan dit in die bloed word dit gevoer na die lewer en sovoorts na die selle toe. Okay, so hier is die ileum, dis die laaste gedeelte van die dun darm en dis natuurlik waar absorpsie plaasvind in hierdie lang darm. So hier's ook weer daai villi en daar's microvilli ook, so as 1 en 2 en hulle sê hierdie oppervlakte van hierdie totale darm is so groot dat dit omtrent 'n tennisbaan kan vul. Dis hoe groot hierdie oppervlakte is. En hy sê daar's miljoene tiny finger-like projections called villi. So as jy hom so 'n dwarsdeursnit kry, dan kry jy dit hier so. Dan gaan ons daarvan af gaan ons na die kolon toe. So dis hoe die kolon ook aan die binnekant kyk. En hier vind fermentasie plaas. Die water word hier uitgetrek of die vloeistof wat hier is en dan gaan dit uit as feses. Okay, maar wat baie meer belangrik is as dit, so wat daar's daai miljoene van daai villi in die darms, maar wat nog baie meer is die microbiome. Dis die vriendelike bakterieë wat daai villi hierdie bedek. En as dit nie bedek is nie, dan begin dit lek en kry ons die leaky gut syndroom wat ons al oor gepraat het en so aan. So dis die goeie bakterieë wat ons leef in simbiose saam met dit, net soos 'n plant, net soos die plante saam leef met die vriendelike bakterieë wat in die grond is, wat die minerale en die metale en goed opbreek en aan die plant verskaf en die plant verskaf weer die sonlig terug na die wortels toe. So daai simbiose is ook in mense en dis baie belangrik. So om net vir julle 'n idee te gee oor die microbiome in ons gutstelsel, bakterieë per milliliter is 10 tot die mag 1. Soos 10 tot die mag 1 is mos 100, né? En dan in die small intestine, okay, so dis vir die afbreek hierso van die kosse. Dan 10 tot die mag 3 en dis in die maag, daai ene. Hierdie is dan 10 tot die mag 3, so is 3 nulle, so dit is dan wat se 10.000. En dan hier dis per milliliter. Dan is hier 10 tot die mag 7, 10 tot die mag 11 in die kolon vir fermentasie. So dit is die getalle. En dan hier is al die soorte wat 'n ou kry. Kyk hierdie kleure, elkeen van hierdie bloue veronderstel 'n ander soort bakterieë. En hier kan jy sien wat is daar so, en hierdie is meer op die vel, nê, aan die buitekant. So aan die buitekant op die vel is dat oral van jou kop tot by jou tone, tussen die tone en by jou hakke en so op terug by jou rug, en dit is by agter jou ore en so voort. So hierdie vriendelike bakterieë is aan die buitekant, en dan is dit ook aan die binnekant van ou se liggaam. In die verskillende organe kry jy verskillende soorte bakterieë. So hier's weer die kleure wat jy kry en die verskillende soorte, daar's hulle name daarso. En dan kry jy die by die mond, by die longe, by die skin, by die gut, by die vagina, by die skin, die wound, en so aan kry jy verskillende soorte. So hierdie is dysbiotic, so dis die wat nie goed werk nie, en wat dysbiosis met ander woorde siekte veroorsaak, aanleiding gee tot siekte, soos immunodeficiency cause severe dysbiosis, cystic fibrosis, primary immunodeficiencies in the gut. Dysbiosis is induced by antibiotic. So dis wat die goed afbreek, wat die vriendelike bakterieë afbreek en wat lei tot al hierdie siektes. So die balans van gesonde en siek bakterieë in ons daar moet meer goeies wees as slegtes. So daar is altyd die slegtes en die goeies, maar as die goeies moet oorheers, so hulle moet baie meer wees as dit as die slegtes. En dit ons kan dit beheer deur regte eetgewoontes en deur aanvullings en so aan. So hier is die hoeveelheid van microbiome in nommers. Up to 90% of all disease can be reached in some way back to the gut and health of microbiome. Jy 10 tot 100 triljoen symbiotic microbial cells harbored by each person, primary bacteria in the gut that make up the human microbiotic. Is eintlik scary dat hierdie mense se genes, number of non-redundant genes is 3.3 million. There are 10 times as many outside organisms as there are human cells in the human body. So die microbiome is 10 keer meer as al die selle in 'n ou se liggaam. So dit klink eintlik amper soos 'n muurnes, jy weet, van lewe wat hier binne aangaan en op my vel. Ek kan dit net nie sien nie, maar dit moet alles in simbiose en in balans saamwerk. Dit is hoe wonderlik die mens gemaak is. So hier is, hy sê meer as 10,000 different microbe species wat hulle nou al geïdentifiseer is. 100 to 1, the genes in our microbiome outnumber the genes in our genome by about 100 to 1. So as meer microbes as genes in jou liggaam. And approximate 22,000 number of genes in the human gene catalog. So daai human genome, as hulle hom uitskryf, dan is dit 22,000 gene. Okay. Percentage individual human are identical to one another in terms of host genome. Okay, ek weet nie of ek heeltemal daarmee saamstem nie, maar okay, so dit is die basiese wat ek bymekaar gesit het, maar ek wil nou gaan na 'n video wat ek graag vir julle wil wys van 'n ekspert op die gebied. En ek kon net gou die share screen op hom sit. Professor Simon Carding. Right.
I've been informing you a little bit about what goes on in your gut, and in particular all the microbes that live in your gut and why they're so important for your health, and why under some conditions they can actually cause quite severe disease. So there's been a significant shift in our understanding of what causes disease. And I think, you know, traditionally we've always thought of it's to do with who we are, our genes, and then the things we do as we go through life. So lifestyle and what we eat and what we get exposed to in the environment. And it's those two that come together to either keep us healthy or to cause disease. But what's apparent now is that in the middle of this, and that may be involved in interpreting a lot of these things that we do and eat, are our gut microbes. And they're a direct link to our genetic material, and they can in turn influence how we react and respond to things in the environment and how they can keep us healthy or not. And really the understanding of gut microbes has really taken a fantastic leap since around 2000. This graph here shows the number of scientific articles that have been published about gut microbes. And you see they really started to take off here around 2002. And that's because of technology. So before 2002, the only way we could really identify and characterize our gut microbes was by what we could culture on a petri dish. And since we now know that about 80% of our gut microbes can't be cultured, that really isn't a good representation of what's in our gut. But then with the advent of gene sequencing technology, we can now identify microbes according to their genetic blueprint. And what's apparent is that different types of bacteria have a unique genetic fingerprint. So if we can identify the fingerprint, we can say whether or not they're present or absent. And this, as I said, has led to this huge explosion in this area of research. We can now identify microbes that we cannot culture. And so this has led to massive interest in gut microbes. And some of these are very recent. Well, the Daily Mail thinks that healthy gut bacteria might be linked to anxiety. And then we've got others that linking gut-brain connection, autism, probiotics as a means of treating diseases. And then a couple of books. This one has just come out. And those of you in the Institute will notice the significance of broccoli on the front, as the Institute is responsible for generating strains of broccoli that have lots of nutrients, good beneficial nutrients in them. But really the message here is that what we eat influences our microbes, which in turn can influence our brain function and keeping it normal. But as always, we have to be aware of the hype. Okay, so whenever we read these articles, we need to have a couple of things in mind that allow us to determine whether or not, you know, there's some factual basis to it or whether it's hype. And these are some of the questions that I would say you need to ask. So the obvious one is, well, so what? Do these differences they're detected, do they really matter? Are the changes a cause or a consequence of the disease? And of course, we want to know how it works. What's the mechanism? So is there anything in this article that allows us to understand how it actually works? And then a lot of experiments are carried out on animals because we can't do many interventions in humans for ethical reasons. So another obvious question is, well, is a mouse a small human? No, it isn't. So we've got to bear that in mind. And then obviously we've got to think, well, is there something else they haven't looked at which could explain what they're describing? So behavior and lifestyle are two important things. So I'm going to try and sort of touch on some of these things in the rest of my talk. So this is what I'm going to cover. I think I need to introduce the gut to you. I'll talk a little bit about microbes, some interesting facts, a little bit of trivia, and then how gut microbes may play a role in determining what we eat and what the consequences of what we eat are for our health and well-being. and then how we actually might manipulate the gut microbes to improve or restore our health. That's what I call lawn care. Right, start with, so the gut, mouth to the anus. It's a long tube. Here's a picture taken with an endoscope, and you can see it's not a smooth tube. It's got these ridges to it, the muscles. This is what allows food to be propelled through the gut, but it's not a smooth tube. It has lots of finger-like projections that we call villi that stick into the lumen to capture nutrients and absorb them. So the tube is quite long, it's like 9 meters from mouth to anus, and somebody has taken the trouble of trying to calculate what the surface area of all these villi are, and the outcome of that is it's probably about the size of a badminton court. So it's an incredibly large area, and it has to be large in order to take up the nutrients that are in your diet to keep you healthy. And then we also consider the process of digestion. And the gut is in fact a massive bioreactor. So we take in foods, plant material, for example, and they're broken down, first of all, in the small intestine here, where the small, simple sugars are absorbed. And then the larger, more complex plant material that we eat in our diet passes through into the large bowel or the colon, where it's fermented. And it's fermented by the bacteria that live in the colon. And the end product of all of this is something called short-chain fatty acids, which are very important because they can provide about 5 to 15% of our daily energy requirements. In some animals, it's up to 30%. So this has to be a very efficient process to keep us alive, basically. And the enzymes that are responsible, the proteins that digest these food material and the polysaccharides, we only have about 20 genes in our whole genome that will allow, that encode proteins that will break down these carbohydrates. But one bacterial species, this one in particular, Bacteroides, has 260. And you think there are 1,000 species, so that's a vast number of proteins that can digest our food. So the bacteria that live in our colon are ideally suited for processing our food and extracting the maximum level of nutrients from them. So it's a bioreactor. A little bit about the microbes. So the gut is packed full of microbes. There is no space. That endoscope image I showed you, they've displaced and rinsed out all the bacteria. Normally that would be jam-packed with bacteria. Most of them are floating free in the lumen, but a large number of them actually make physical contact with the cells that line our gut. So there's actually some intimate association of these microbes with our gut. And there are two terms that you may come across we use to describe these microbes: the microbiota, which is to describe all the microorganisms that live in the gut, and there's the microbiome, and that's all the microbes plus all their genes combined. So microbiota and microbiome, two words you may have come across in a lot of these articles. But individually, bacteria are incredibly small. So this is the head of a pin under an electron microscope, and each of these orange dots represents one bacterial cell. So you can see that you can get lots of bacteria on the top, on the tip of a pin. They're incredibly small. But although they're small, they make up for that in their vast numbers. So we have about 10 trillion cells in our body, but we actually have 10 times that number of bacteria in our body. And so on this scale here, we have enough cells that would fill half of one of our legs. All the rest of the body will be filled up with microbes, bacteria. And then if we think about all the DNA that we have, oh, this is an interesting quote. Sorry, I forgot about this. This is interesting, just to give you an idea of the scope and scale of the numbers here of bugs, the bacteria in our colon. So just 1 linear centimeter contains more bacteria than all the humans that have ever been born. So it's a vast number of microbes. And then the DNA elements. This is the big toe, okay? And that represents the DNA in our body that is actually ours. Okay, so everything else, more than 99% of the DNA is bacterial DNA. So, just think about that. That's actually quite amazing, really. So we are carrying around a lot of DNA, but very little of it is our own. Okay, now this is the audience participation bit. Some trivia. How much do you think all the microbes in our body weigh? Don't be shy. PhD students at the back, come on. How much? What? Stop conferring. Ooh. No? Anybody else? Kilogram? Closer? 2 kilograms? 2 to 3 kilograms. A lot, right? A couple of bags of sugar. And if you put it in a volume size, about 1.5 liters. And there's about 1,000 different species, 1,000 different types packed in there. And this is what they need to keep them healthy. About 50 to 65 grams of these things, which are sugars, to keep them healthy. So that amount is needed every day just to keep your microbes healthy. And then you've got all the other things that you need to keep your body healthy. And so a product of all this metabolism is gas. So how much do you think we expel every day? And this is everybody, so it's not just old men and teenagers. Everybody in this room expels gas. How much do you think we expel every day? How many liters? How many? 5? No, that's a bit high. Anybody else? 1 to 4. That's a lot. And of course, at the end of all this, we have waste. So 60% of your stool is made up of bacteria, live and dead. Okay? So that's trivia. Interesting thing. Just before you have your meal, you can run through some of these facts and figures. But they are very, very important. And we know they're very important because of animals that we can keep germ-free. So these are animals that have never been exposed to any microbes. They're sterile. And when we examine these animals, they're clearly compromised. They're deficient. So they have nutritional deficiencies. They don't grow. But interestingly, they live longer. So if you want to live longer, don't eat. That's the problem. They have a defective gut. So their gut is not properly formed, so it's leaky. And their immune system is very poorly developed. So they're very susceptible to infections. And in fact, if you introduce a pathogen to these animals, it can kill them very quickly because they have no protection, no immunity. And also their development is affected as well. So clearly we're already starting now to move into the gut brain. So they are really poor animals, very sick. So the microbiota and the gut microbes are very important. So your microbiota is unique to you. It's your identity. It's like your fingerprint. Your microbes are unique to you. However, the microbes you have are shared with other family members. So there's some commonality there. And interestingly, looking at the microbiota of monozygotic and dizygotic, that's identical, non-identical twins, you know, there's no difference. So even if you're an identical twin, you'll have similar differences in your microbiota to non-identical twins. So what does that mean? Well, it means that genes are important, who you are is important, but also the nurture, the nature. The nurturing is also important in shaping the microbes. But we now know that we all have a core microbiota. So there's about 57 species of bacteria that we all share. And there are 2 types that predominate in all of us here. And not unsurprisingly, these are conserved because they perform important functions, such as ones here. Degradation of carbohydrates, so degrading our plant material we eat. They also provide these fatty acids that we need to keep us alive every day. And also amino acids and vitamins, which we can't produce, but our gut bacteria can. So it's not surprising there's a core that all of us need to keep us healthy, but then everything else, all the other 800 or 2,000 species are all unique to us. So where do they come from? Well, your parents, and particularly your mother. So if you think you have bad bacteria, you can blame your parents, fully justified. Okay? Now, originally it was thought that we were born sterile, but that's changing slightly. It's now evidence that we can, in fact, babies do get exposed in the womb to bacteria that the mother has, and that can be through the placenta and also via other routes. But by far the biggest source or time point at which you get exposed to microbes is soon after birth. Because if you believe we are born sterile, then the bacteria can colonize very, very quickly. So the first few months after birth, you're rapidly being colonized by bacteria. The types of bacteria depend on the delivery. So if it's vaginal delivery, then most of the microbes that will colonize the baby will come from the mother. If it's a C-section, then the bacteria actually come from the people in the operating theatre that are handling the baby. And most of those will be skin type bacteria. And that's important because there are now evidence that links later onset of various diseases and disorders back to whether or not you were vaginally born or from a C-section and the types of microbes that initially colonize the body. Other things that will impact on the types of microbes that will colonize this infant are delivery. So is it a normal birth or is it, does it require intensive care? The age at birth is also important. Is it a full-term birth or preterm birth? And hygiene, obviously where you're born. The home versus the hospital have very different population of microbes that can colonize the infant. And then after that, things that will impact and cause alterations in the microbes are antibiotics. And again, it depends on how many, what types, and for how long. And also very important is nutrition, whether or not the infant's breast or bottle fed. And again, the breast milk contains lots of ingredients, including microbes, which can colonize the baby and keep them healthy. But as we go older, we get exposed to microbes from other sources and by different routes. So via the nose and lungs, we breathe microbes in, the mouth, and the gut, obviously the things we eat, and through the skin. And these are the sources. So water and the food we eat will contain microbes. We have pets. If we live on a farm, we're getting exposed to different microbes from the animals that we live with. Where we live, do we live in the country or do we live in the city? The population of microbes, again, are very different. And then the type of accommodation or the dwelling that you live in. You know, is it single dwelling? Is it multi-dwelling? All these people are contributing microbes that will you'll be exposed to. And then, are you indoors? Are you outdoors? Are you active? Are you inactive? Are you an Xbox fan? Or are you out playing football? These things will all expose different types of microbes. All of these are important because beyond 3 years of age, your microbiota is pretty much set for life. So the early years of life are critical for the development of a healthy microbiota. However, there are cultural things and social things that will also impact on the types of microbes that populate it. Now, here's a fact most of you probably didn't know. Okay, interesting one to experiment on. So, intimacy, and you know, it's across the animal kingdom, different types of intimacy, transfer of microbes. Grooming, it's another one. Nurturing. Food sharing, right? We often sit down at the table and eat together, and we can be sharing food. It's a good way of transferring microbes. And then there's something that's slightly less, you know, pleasant. But animals do transfer microbes to their offspring via this route, by regurgitation of food and transfer of food as well as microbes. So the message here is if you have some good bacteria, you need to share it, because there are some of us poor, less fortunate people, scientists for one, right? I mean, my wife is very fond of telling me I have very little culture, so maybe my culture is my bacteria. So share your good bacteria if you have them. Right, so we have our microbiota, we've been exposed, we've got a stable population, but it's not the end of the story. They do change. And here we've got a representation of aging. So here you can see these circles, the different colors represent different types of microbes. As we age, you can see the colors change as the populations change. And there are some differences between formula-fed and breastfed babies. Transition to solid food is a big one in terms of shifts in microbial populations. And then you can see as we age, there is also a shift as well in the population. Aging has an impact in itself, but one of the most striking impacts is through antibiotic treatment. And this slide just illustrates the impact of two antibiotics to treat Clostridium difficile, which is a severe infection that is often acquired in hospital. So as a result of the outgrowth of this bacteria, we get sick. So we're administered vancomycin or metronidazole. And what you can see is the diversity, the number of bacteria we have in our gut is drastically reduced because the antibiotics have killed them off. But it's also killed off Clostridium difficile, which is a good thing. But you know, there's a consequence of this in that we wiped out a lot of our good bacteria. So too many antibiotics for too long have a very profound and can be a long-lived effect on our microbiota. So antibiotics could be described as a man-made catastrophe. However, most of the antibiotics that are used in agriculture and in farm animals in particular to check infection and accelerate growth. So about 19,000 tons of antibiotics are used in agriculture every year. And of course, antibiotics get excreted by animals and humans as well. So they can contaminate streams and rivers and they get back into the food chain. And also giving antibiotics to children has its consequences as well. So in the US, by 2 years of age, most children had at least 3 courses of antibiotics. You know, there's a phenomenal number of doses of antibiotics given out in the US. And what this does is it drives bacteria to become resistant. And this is serious, okay? So this particular organism here, MRSA, now is resistant to most of the antibiotics that we have in the pharmacy. And more than 19,000 people a year in the US are killed, which is much higher than the number of people dying from AIDS. I don't know if you've just seen on the news today, but there's a UK government review group has recommended the pharmaceutical industry invest $2 billion in developing new antibiotics. There's a real need for this. But one of the causes is that we administer too many antibiotics. We take too many antibiotics. It leads to resistance. Cautionary tale. The other side of the story is that gut microbes can actually work on drugs. Rather than being affected by drugs, they can also work on drugs. The thing to bear in mind is that the vast majority of the drugs we take are given orally. And so the microbes in the gut can actually alter the drugs. They can alter their structure. They can produce factors that interfere with the drugs. And they can alter how the body reacts to the drugs. And here are some examples. So the bad ones are these drugs here, which are painkillers, anti-cancer drugs, drugs used to control high blood pressure. In certain individuals that have certain population of microbes, administering of these drugs will lead to increased toxicity. And with some antibiotics as well, there's a similar story. But there's a good side to this as well, in that gut microbes can process drugs to make them more active, more efficacious, such as this antibiotic here and this anti-inflammatory drug. So what this means is that how you react to a drug can depend on the type of microbes you have in your gut. And one of the things that medicine is heading towards, perhaps, is being able to administer or prescribe you a drug based on the population of microbes in your gut. There's no point in giving you a drug that your microbes will make toxic. You want microbes to actually help the drugs become better for you, more efficacious. So this is what's been called personalized medicine. The drugs will be given to you because you have been determined to respond best to those drugs. So then that brings me to really the meat of my talk here in a way. And this is what I'm going to try and persuade you of, that your gut microbes can now influence what you eat, when you eat, and what happens when you do eat. And so I formulated this hypothesis that gut microbes influence their host's food choices. And I've sort of put up 3 predictions in order to prove the hypothesis could be correct. The first one is that the microbes you have in your gut is a consequence of the food that you eat and how you behave in the environment. So this, interesting though, it's not a map of the galaxies. It's actually the results of screening the microbiomes in a lots of different animals. And this is sort of a zoo collection. Each dot represents similar microbiotas in population of animals. And the lines of separation here indicate how similar or related they are to other microbiotes in other animals. So we've got these sequences, we know all the microbes, and this is how they all cluster. So you can see different clusters. So horses and rhinos are up here in their own little cluster. Ruminants, such as sheep and cows, make their own cluster. Elephants have their own little grouping up here. And then we have the carnivores, so the lions and bears, again, they're a different cluster in red. And then we have leaf-eating monkeys, so vegetarian monkeys, and pigs. And then the other primates, humans included, we're here. So we're separate from the leaf-eating monkeys. So what does this mean? Well, it means that who we are and what we eat heavily influences the microbes that populate our gut. And that's reinforced by this study in looking at the microbes that are present in the gut of people that live in Burkina Faso in Africa, that have a rural diet, primarily vegetarian-based diet, and Europeans, and this is actually Italians, have a Western diet. You can see just looking at the colors, they're very different, okay? And what's interesting is if the people in Africa migrate to Europe, to Italy, and then adopt the Western diet, they lose this and become this distribution of microbes. So they haven't changed in terms of their genes or anything. All they've done is their diet's changed, and it's caused this profound shift in the microbes. So the diet really is a driving force in making up the microbes that you have in your gut. And here's another example. This is the Burmese python. So they go through periods of fasting and then feasting. Just looking at 3 different types of bacteria in the fasting state, you see very low levels. But if they're given a meal, you know, within half an hour, you can see these striking shifts and expansions and increases in certain types of bacteria. And these will eventually stabilize, and then as the animal goes back into a fasting state, they will decline again. So fasting reduces the overall diversity, and then feasting expands the diversity in response to diet. So quite striking. That's diet. Stress is another thing we have to cope with in our environment. And this is some evidence that links stress impacting on our gut microbes. So noradrenaline, norepinephrine and epinephrine, which are all part of adrenaline, are produced in response to stress. And that can have a direct effect on the bacteria that live in our gut. And it can cause the outgrowth of particular types of bacteria. So here, for example, 10,000-fold increase in growth in response to adrenaline that's produced under stress. And surgery is a stress, and this bacteria here rapidly expands following surgery. And if it's not contained, then it can cause sepsis. And mice that get exposed to a type of stress rapidly change their microbial populations. And that's just shown here. So these are normal animals. See, most of the bacteria are little circular shapes. But then under food deprivation, which is a form of stress, you know, they rapidly change to rod-shaped bacteria. And that was observed over 40 years ago. So we've known for a while that stress is a major factor. And then what's interesting is that probiotic bacteria that are present in some of these health foods, here's one from Morrison's, and this is Actimel, they contain bacteria that produce a neurotransmitter called GABA. And GABA is normally produced in the body. What it does is it dampens down excitable neurons, so it relaxes you. So, and this is being used by the pharmaceutical industry to develop mimics of gamma so they can overstimulate these receptors to make you even more relaxed. And in fact, even knock you out. Because anesthetics can work by mimicking the GABA that is produced by these bacteria. So benzodiazepines, alcohol, right? We all feel nice and relaxed after a glass of wine or a bottle of beer. Well, you know, one of the ways that comes that about is that they're stimulating these receptors that gut bacteria can do as well. So the gut bacteria can already, you know, hopefully take us from a stressful state to a relaxed state. And so one of the other things I wanted to highlight here was this, obesity. Lots of evidence in the literature now and in the newspapers that changes in our gut microbes can make us obese. So gut microbes and obesity. So this is a very interesting experiment. It's probably the best experiment that demonstrates how microbes can influence whether or not we're obese or lean. So here we have identical twins, but one of the twins is obese and one is lean. So we've taken the stool sample from each of these, extracted the bacteria. What we've done is we've put them into mice. The mice are then put on a regular diet, low fat, high fiber diet. The ones that got the gut microbes from the obese twin become obese. But the mice that got the microbes from the lean twin stay lean. That's a direct causal link. Okay, so that's not really hype, that's a bit more close to fact. So of course it's mice, it's not humans, but this is the best evidence we have to date that shows a direct causal link between our gut microbes influencing whether or not we stay lean or whether we become obese. And then this was in the Sunday Times this week. This is from a study carried out by Tim Spector at King's College London. And he fed his son, I don't know if his son was a willing volunteer, a high-fat diet for 10 days, Big Macs and lots of Coke. And then he was taking stool samples before and after the 10-day diet. What he showed was that, first of all, there's a reduction in nutrients because he's now eating this very processed, refined food. There was a loss in number of his gut microbes, but he gained 2 kilos in weight in just 10 days. So the interpretation of this is that highly processed foods present in Big Macs contain ingredients that are toxic to certain microbes. And this leads to a loss of diversity. We're losing microbes because of this. And if you want to know more, this individual has produced his book. I had nothing to do with it, so I'm not going to buy it or anything. But if you want to know more, his book's here. So loss of diversity is a recurring theme. And in fact, I've already said in aging, we have this loss of diversity. We lose richness, we lose microbes. The same in obesity, and it's the same in other diseases, particularly inflammatory bowel disease and Crohn's disease. So the loss of diversity in the types of microbes in the gut is not good. It can have quite profound health effects. And so it's not just gut diseases. All of these diseases shown here are linked by a common theme in a change or shift in the population of microbes in the gut. And generally that shift means less diversity. Interestingly, quite a few are linked with diseases of the central nervous system, neurodegenerative diseases, the heart, the liver, fat, and rheumatoid arthritis. There's lots, and this is not a complete list by any means. So obviously, well, is there one microbe or one population of microbes that can cause these diseases? So it's like looking for Waldo. Found him? Yeah? There he is. The only problem is, there are lots of Waldos. And so it's probably not one microbe, it's a combination of microbes that when they get together, you know, it's a bit like a gang of teenagers. You know, they can be rowdy or they can be miserable and antisocial. So it's the population when they come together that they causes or is probably responsible for the effects on our health. It's not one, it's probably lots. Okay, so moving on to the predictions, we're now at the second one. So gut bacteria can, by influencing how our body works, influence our appetite and food preferences. So I'm sure this is a familiar scenario for many of you. You know, our mind says, no, take the healthy option, but there's something inside of it that says, no, I really like that piece of cake. Okay, and it may be that gut feeling, you know, I really am hungry for a piece of pie rather than an apple. So what is the evidence that normal gut microbes can influence brain development and behavior? Because that's what we're talking about, brain development and behavior. So this is a summary of an experiment carried out a few years ago, looking at our germ-free mice again. These are sterile mice, and mice that have population gut microbes. This here shows the expression of an anxiety-related gene. So the yellow identifies high levels in the brains of these mice that have gut microbes, but very little expression in germ-free mice. And this maze here is a measurement of how curious, adventurous mice are. So if they're cautious, timid, they'll spend most of their time in the enclosed section, away from the light. But if they're adventurous like this one, you know, they'll be on the open arms. So what this study showed was that gut microbes can affect normal brain development and make these mice more curious. Sorry, wrong way. And perhaps more creative and trying to escape. So it's this fear extinction. You have gut microbes, you become a little bit more cautious, reticent, a little bit more anxious. If you don't have gut microbes, you know, it's the great escape. You're looking for ways out. More striking experiment is this one shown here. So we've got two strains of mice, what we'll call timid and adventurous. So do gut microbes have anything to do with why these animals are timid or adventurous? So what we did, so not what we did, this group in Canada did, was they took the stool from the timid mouse, isolated the microbes, and put it into an adventurous mouse, and that mouse became timid. The other way around, they took the microbes from an adventurous mouse, put it into a timid mouse, and these are germ-free mice, so they're an empty vessel that you can put the microbes into, and they became now adventurous. So this is a direct causal link again, showing the gut microbes can influence the behavior of mice at least. Now, is this translatable to humans? I can see probably some people in the audience thinking, maybe I could give this to my husband, and would he still be a grumpy old man if I gave him some microbes? And would, you know, if my teenage boy had some microbes from, you know, something, maybe they'd become a bit more outgoing, a bit more social, maybe. Maybe a few years from now, maybe I'll have that, but not just yet. But I mean, we really shouldn't be too surprised by this, because we now know that the gut actually contains an awful lot of the neurons and neural circuitry that's present in the brain. And it's often thought to be the second brain. I mean, it has a very large number of neurons, 500 million, and it produces lots of neurotransmitters. And, you know, here's some sort of evidence that sort of links the gut to the brain. So brain dead people, their stomach functions normally for quite a while. It's almost an inherent activity. Anybody that's taken major pain-killing drugs like morphine, for example, you know, there's a risk of constipation that shuts down motility in your gut. And emotions and feeling are intimately associated with bowel function. Right? We've all had the butterflies in the stomach, you know, nervous gut reaction. Well, that's all those neurons in your gut that are firing away. And when you look at the structure of the nerves in the gut that make up the enteric nervous system, you know, these are the neurons or the dendrites here in silver, the white color. This is our gut tissue, and you can see that when we superimpose these two, the nerve fibers actually penetrate and intermix between all our gut tissue, and they actually look like they're actually protruding into the lumen to be able to sense perhaps the presence of factors that they can respond to that are in the gut lumen that could be made by gut microbes. And the vagus nerve is ultimately the route by which all this signaling in the gut leads into the brain. So all these signals here that the enteric nervous system responds to are fed into the brain via the vagus nerve. And so we know that if the vagus nerve is blocked or damaged through injury, profound effect on appetite and eating. In fact, it causes drastic weight loss. So it's clearly a regulator of body weight. And vagus nerve stimulation by hormones and neurotransmitters in the gut can drive excessive eating behavior. So overstimulation is not necessarily a good thing. And not surprisingly, gut microbes can actually regulate how much of these neurotransmitters and hormones are produced in the gut. And they can manipulate this to their own advantage by producing things that can block or stimulate the nerves in the gut. Some microbes control eating behavior by influence signals that are delivered to the brain and by the vagus nerve. And two of the most important are dopamine and serotonin. The dopamine associated with rewards, pleasure, compulsions. Serotonin regulates our mood, our memory, sleep, cognition. Dopamine, about half of the amount of dopamine produced in the body is produced in the gut. And some gut microbes can produce vast amounts of dopamine. And some of you may know that L-dopamine is used to treat Parkinson's disease. Serotonin is even more striking, but virtually all the serotonin in the body is made in the gut. And gut microbes produce factors that can mimic or block serotonin action in the gut. And deficiency of serotonin is linked to depression. So I hope you can see that microbes, by manipulating just these two neurotransmitters, can profoundly influence our mood, behavior, whether we're anxious, whether we're relaxed, how much we sleep, how much we eat. And so linking this to a disease, this is interesting, this is a more recent study now, linking gut microbes to a disease that's called autism spectrum disorder, so autism. So we know from looking at patients' microbiotas that they're disturbed. They have alterations of the makeup of microbes, and also there are altered levels of what the microbes produce. And there's a mouse here that can develop autism-like syndrome. In particular, excessive grooming and vocalization is affected as it is in autistic children. And what this group that worked with this mouse showed that they could restore or treat this mouse by using probiotics, so live bacteria. And so the live bacteria altered the gut composition of the microbes, and it looked now more like normal animals. And this was linked to resealing of the gut. So these animals had a leaky gut, and it was the leakiness allowing these microbe-derived byproducts to get into the bloodstream and into the brain. But as soon as the barrier was improved, the leakage stopped, and it restored the normal levels that you would find in the serum, and it stopped or halted some of the features of autism. So this is animal experimentation, but it clearly shows that there could be a role for alterations in gut microbes that are linked to neurodegenerative diseases and autism in particular. So neurotransmitters, well, there are also hormones produced in the gut which regulate appetite. And here, there are appetites that are produced to say, stop eating, you've eaten too much. Then we have all we need, no more to eat. And then there are hormones that signal to the brain, say, we're hungry, you need to eat. And it's the balance of these two that determine our appetite, regulates how much we eat and when we eat. Not surprisingly now, perhaps you think, well, gut bacteria can alter the balance of these hormones. And these hormones are mainly produced in the gut. So we know that probiotic bacteria can raise the level of this amino acid, tryptophan. And tryptophan is important because it's involved in generating or producing these hormones. And bacteria that live in the gut can produce mimics of some of these hormones. For example, leptin, ghrelin, PYY, that influence your appetite. So they can influence eating and appetite control directly by mimicking the hormones normally produced in the gut. Indirectly, they can stimulate things that will block hormone signaling to change your appetite. And this is a slightly different one. This is very recent, showing how with this information, we can actually use it to try and redress the balance. So here we have this chemical here, which is produced as a result of breakdown and digestion of fats. It's called NAPES. And as I said, these are naturally produced in the small bowel as a process of digestion and lipid digestion. Obese individuals have very low levels compared to normal healthy individuals. And so what this group said, well, okay, what if we engineer a bacteria that lives in the gut to produce this factor? Can we then increase the levels back to normal? And so what they showed is when they fed these bacteria producing this chemical to mice, you could protect them from becoming obese. So give them a high-fat diet, give them lots of Big Macs, they stayed lean, just by giving bacteria that produced this chemical. And what's interesting is this persisted for a very long time. Even after the bacteria had left the body, there was still an effect. So obviously, this could lead to a different type of intervention using these engineered bacteria as a treatment for addressing appetite control and maybe even obesity. So gut microbes, we can engineer them and we can utilize our expertise in working with microbes for beneficial effects. And, I've tried to highlight one or two things that microbes produce that influence our behavior. This is a little bit more of a list that shows things that impact on our body's function. I talked about energy and metabolism. They can produce factors that help us clot blood, or blood coagulation. Neurotransmitters, I've talked about that. Sleep and mood. They produce factors that will determine how much sleep we take, whether or not sleep's beneficial. And it's just they produce factors that cause bad breath. So a variety of things that impact on our health and behavior. So I come to the third prediction, that there is a positive selection system, positive reinforcement, if you like, in which the type of food we eat selects a specific microbe, which in turn then feed back on making us eat more of that. And my example here is the seaweed diet. So a stable diet selects a microbial specialist that lead to us wanting to eat more of these things. So there's two types of seaweed diet. This is one, but I'm not going to talk about that one. I'm going to talk about this one. Okay, seaweed. Now, in Japan, vast amounts of seaweed are consumed every year, about more than 4 kilograms per person. But they can process and eat seaweed because they have genes present in their microbes that produce the enzymes that allow them to break down the seaweed. Okay? The genes originate from bacteria that live on the seaweed. So as they were consuming the seaweed, some of those microbes stayed in the gut long enough to pass on these genes to the normal population of microbes in the gut. So this microbes that contaminated seaweed actually transferred some of the beneficial enzymes and genes they had to the normal population of microbes in the gut. And so this is positive reinforcement because seaweed has lots of health benefits. Detoxification, promotes weight loss, lowers blood cholesterol. So the health reasons to eat it. And the more you eat, the more microbes and genes you have, you acquire, enable you to break it down and get maximal nutritional benefit. So it's this positive reinforcement. But you can only do that if you have the microbes there and the genes present in the first place. Japanese populations do because they consume a lot of that. So there's another type of food preference, which is food avoidance and food allergies. Okay, so food allergies have increased dramatically in recent times. So more than 50% since 1997. And they've been linked to the modern lifestyle, hygiene hypothesis, overuse of antibiotics again, destroying of the microbiota. And so we can sort of look at this in more detail using, again, mice. And so if we destroy the microbiota in mice with antibiotics, we can actually give these mice an allergy to peanuts, just as many children have. But if we reintroduce one type of bacteria into the gut, we can actually cure them of their allergy. And that's this bacteria, Clostridia. So this is direct evidence linking gut microbe activity to food avoidance, okay, and food allergies. So not only are the microbes that will encourage us to eat more, there are microbes in our gut that will stop us from eating things which cause us harm. Smart bugs, really. And also sweetness and taste. Again, if you look at taste receptors that are present on the tongue, germ-free mice have different types of receptors compared to mice that have population of microbes. So germ-free mice have a sweet tooth. they prefer more sweets and have lots more sweet receptors on their tongues than mice that have population of microbes in their gut. And so the nearest analogy I'd come to in humans is patients that undergo gastric bypass surgery for obesity. Their food preferences shift enormously. In fact, they develop avoidance strategies to stop eating some dairy products and even meat. And this is accompanied by striking changes in their gut microbes as a result of the surgery. So microbes can influence food preferences by altering our taste perception of foods. So all of this together is summarized here. So what I'm predicting is that food cravings are associated with vagal nerve stimulation. By blocking that, we can control appetite and we can reduce food cravings. By altering our gut microbes, we can cure food cravings and we can cure maybe allergies. And then the diversity of our gut microbiota and what they produce should affect food choices in satiety. Okay? So if we increase the diversity, we have a better chance of controlling appetite and keeping us healthy and not from gaining excessive weight. So that's great. So how do we actually go about changing the bugs that live in our gut? So this is gut microtherapy, which I'm leading to lawn care. Somebody think, well, when's he going to talk about lawn care? That's coming. Right, so message. To fix your brain, you need to fix your gut. And there are different strategies we can use. There's the expensive one, pharmacy, prescription of drugs. Sorry, getting a bit ahead of ourselves here. Antimicrobial therapy. So obviously I've highlighted some of the issues with antimicrobial therapy. Toxicity can cause the outgrowth of pathogens like Clostridium difficile. And we develop resistance. Our bugs develop resistance to the antibiotic, and they're not cheap. Vancomycin, however, has been used for diet-induced obesity, to control diet-induced obesity. So it's not all bad news, but it's still expensive. Other approaches rely on biotics, pro and prebiotics, and then I'm going to talk about transplants. Here we go, I will do. Probiotics, here we go. Live microorganisms, which, when administered in adequate amounts, confer a health benefit. That is the WHO definition of a probiotic. They are found in a variety of foods. These will be most familiar to you. These are generally for anybody. Then we have ones that are designed for children and even pets. So you can give probiotics to your pets. Evidence that they work or may work. So there's evidence that they can decrease food intake. They can reduce fat mass, improve insulin sensitivity, stop us from becoming diabetic. Yogurt is the food that's most associated with reduced weight gain. If you think of the things that we eat to try and reduce our weight, yogurt is one of the things we generally eat. And probiotic treatment in pregnancy can prevent excessive weight gain in the infant after birth. So the other approach is prebiotics. And prebiotics can be considered as food to feed your healthy microbes. And if you go, remember back to my gut trivia slide, I said you need to consume 50 to 60 grams of these things. Well, this is what I'm talking about. These are the types of food that will provide the fuel for your healthy bacteria. And they can be in lots of things from prebiotics, even toothpaste contain prebiotics, food for your gut bacteria. So this is what they are. Generally, as I said, they're different types of sugars. Breast milk is a very good source of inulin, which is a very good prebiotic. And then there's a variety of foods here. But 5 a day. This is one of the reasons why we keep saying eat 5 servings of fruit and vegetables a day. They are a very good source of prebiotics to keep your gut bugs healthy. Okay. So you can take probiotics and you can feed your healthy bugs by eating these types of foods. The more radical approach is, okay, that's not working. Let's get rid of everything and replace it. So fecal microbiota transplantation. So this is it in a snapshot. And maybe it'll cure me of my food addiction. Yeah? Sounds gross. God, how the hell could this work? But it does work. It works incredibly well for treating gut infection. Again, C. difficile come up again. You know, it's a 94% cure rate, which is much, much higher than all the drugs and antibiotics. Sounds gross, but it works. So the question is, why does it work and how does it work? Well, that's something that the Institute we're very interested in knowing. So it works, but you might think, well, this is something new. I've only been reading it in the Daily Mail for the last year or so. But in fact, it goes back a long, long way. The Chinese were way ahead of us. So 2,500 years ago, they were giving people yellow soup to drink to keep them healthy. Vets have been using it for a couple of hundred years. The process called transformation, transferring stool from one animal to another to keep it healthy. First really used, tested in humans in 1958. It was given to 4 patients that were near death from a type of colitis. It cured all 4 patients. And then since the C. difficile experiment, you know, we've treated over 500 patients, no side effects whatsoever, and the success rate is incredibly high. And it's stable. So as far as 5 years out, you know, these people are still free of Clostridium difficile infection. So it is very good. So how do we do it? There are several options. Okay, there's the capsule. There's, you know, things you can have as part of your healthy diet. Or there's the very more unpleasant way, the tube. And if you go on the internet, you can get DIY kits that will allow you to do this at home. Very scary stuff, but you know, I think we'd all prefer the capsule. So what are we going to use it for? So I've said, you know, there's some obvious diseases, obesity. Clearly, I've given you some evidence that gut microbes cause obesity. So if we change our gut microbes, can we stop us from becoming obese or even cause weight loss? Eating disorders. Again, I've showed you there's a link between our gut microbes and what we eat or what we can't eat. So again, this could be another application. Autoimmune diseases, inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, rheumatoid arthritis, they're all potential. Slightly more speculative, but something we're interested at the Institute in looking at, can we reverse some of the effects of aging? Not quite sure what that is. No, I don't want BT broadband. So yes, can we reverse the effects of aging? So our gut microbes change drastically as we age, and that's associated with a decline in our immune system function. We become less resistant to infections. I mean, some people here probably annual flu vaccines, right? Try and boost our immunity. What if we could boost your immunity by giving you a capsule? Would you rather have a needle or a capsule? Maybe. Maybe we can reverse other signs of aging. Yeah? Maybe IFL will be rich and famous because we've got the youth capsule. Yeah. Reg is taking orders at the front here. And does it work? Well, this is another example of how it works. So this is fecal microbes transplant by a nasogastro tube. So this is, you know, the way it's been working so far. Taking fecal microbes from lean donors, given to patients with metabolic syndrome. These are patients at risk of developing diabetes. 6 weeks post-treatment, we can clear glucose from the blood, and they're now responding to insulin. And this is associated with a drastic change of their gut microbes, increased diversity. But with everything, there's always a but. And this is the but. Donor selection is important. This is a very recent report that was published. 32-year-old female with a recalcitrant C. difficile infection. Remember, this is the disease we can cure with FMT. She decided she wanted to take stool cell from her daughter as the donor, as you probably would. Her daughter was a little overweight, but she later gained weight and became obese. The mother, 16 months post-treatment, had been given her daughter's gut microbes, became obese. She gained excessive weight. Despite all interventions, she could not keep the weight off. And at 36 months, she weighed 80 kilograms, a BMI of 34.5. What this led in this particular hospital was a complete change in the way donors are selected. Okay, so there is the smoking gun here. Obviously, the clinicians will think, well, it came from an obese patient, we just transferred the phenotype to the mother. But maybe, but clearly there's a link here. So what we have to think about carefully now is donor selection. What is the criteria we need to apply to a donor in order to be able to use their stool sample for a transplant? Here's the lawn care. So if you think about trying to keep your gut microbes healthy, here's our healthy, flourishing lawn. We can devastate it with antibiotics, or we can just let the weeds grow. So if we've got antibiotics here, we might want to give prebiotics, turf food. Or we might want to put new seed down, probiotics. Right? And then the more radical therapy, a lawn transplant, bacteria therapy, okay? So think of your gut, keeping it healthy as lawn care. And this is my take-home message, okay? If you have young children, get them a pet and let them roll around in the mud, let them eat mud, maximum exposure, lots of healthy microbes. And with that, I just thank you, and I'll be happy to take any questions you might have. Thank you.
Okay, so is julle nog daar? Bietjie gruesome, maar ek stem nie saam met alles wat hy gesê het nie, so maar daar's baie goeie punte daarin. So ek wil hê ons moet 'n bietjie praat oor van die goeters en ek wil hê julle moet so 'n bietjie deelneem, moenie bang wees of skaam wees om weet, want dit is die enigste manier waarop 'n mens leer. En moenie bang wees om 'n bydrae te lewer of 'n vraag te vra en te dink jy gaan miskien dom klink of wat ook al nie. So ons moet maar leer, ons is 'n groep, ons wil case studies doen een van die dae. So ons wil graag hê julle moet deelneem. So daar was 3 hoofpunte gewees wat hy gemaak het. En miskien moet ek net 'n witbord hier opkry en dan kan ek miskien aantekeninge maak terwyl julle bydrae gee. So wie wil eers ietsie sê oor? Stem julle saam met alles wat hulle gehoor het? 'n dingetjie wat ek wil noem, wat julle miskien baie moet oordink, is dat hy het gesê, en onthou ons glo in holistiese gesondheid, so ons dink spirit, soul and body. So wat hy gesê het is die maag is die tweede brein. En uit die hele gesprek het hy daarop neergekom dat die microbiome beheer eintlik ou se brein, terwyl ek glo dit is andersom, dat dit wat jy dink en wat in jou mind is, beheer eintlik jou microbiome. So die goggetjies kan nie in beheer wees nie, die mind, ou se mind, jou gees en jou brein is in beheer van jou gesondheid. En ek glo wat Caroline Leaf gesê het oor, jy weet, dat jou mind, wat jy dink en wat jy sê, kan jou DNA verander, maar ek glo ook jou microbiome, as ons nou dink aan die punt wat hy gemaak het van stres. So wat sê julle daarvan? Laat ek bietjie hoor. Is julle nog daar?
Sorry.
Philip?
Is dit okay?
Ja, praat bietjie harder.
Weet, ekskuus, kan jy my hoor?
Ek gaan jou bietjie harder sit, ja. Okay, praat maar.
Goed uitdagh. Ja, okay. Miskien is dit daai. Al wat ek nou al baie agtergekom het, is die feit van die wat die vernietiging daarvan, want ek weet byvoorbeeld ciprofloxacin, dis die antibiotika wat nog geweldig baie voorgeskryf word. Vernietig, ek het ook eenslag daaroor praat, as jy 2 kursusse in 'n jaar agter mekaar neem, dan word daar sekere tipe van 'n spesie van my microbiome seker maak. Ek weet nie presies wat die ding is daarvoor is, of het nou watter een dit nou genoem word, maar dat hy heeltemal vernietig word. Jy weet, en dit is 'n ding wat geweldig gevaarlik wêreld by antibiotika misbruik. Wat daar is
Ja, ja.
en ek wat ek nou al agtergekom het, se van my dokters wat
Ja, 'n bietjie weg.
baie antibiotika skryf en daar dit is inderdaad hoewel hulle nie as daar voorskrifte vul nie. So in die ander lande is daar redelik al bietjie meer sharp daarmee, maar dit is sommer net 'n ding wat ek wil noem. En
Wat
ja,
noem jy hom? Hoe spel jy hom?
dis so ciprofloxacillin. Presies by die dis 'n meeste van die tyd urineweginfeksies en goed wat hulle gebruik of maag, nogal weer vir maagmoeilikheid ook gebruik weet. Skryf hulle dit voor en dan sit dan die vernietigende effek daarvan. Dit is vir my ons sit in 'n krisis van superinfeksies al baie nou. Hy het daar genoem hoe gevaarlik dit nou is, ja. Maar dit is sommer net so. Wat ek optel met dit, jy weet.
Ja. Ekskuus my witbord wil nie mooi werk nie, so ek miskien moet julle maar 'n bietjie notas neem. Van wat daar gesê is. Wat sê julle van die feit dat die microbiome die brein beïnvloed of eintlik soos wat hy dit nou gestel het in beheer is van ook jou emosionele kondisies en daai. Ek dink dit kan in 'n mate waar wees, maar wat dink julle daarvan?
So dis Anina.
Ja.
Ek sien dit met meeste van die werk wat ek doen, kom ek duidelik agter dat as daar voorskrifte vir antidepressants, vir mood stabilizers, etc., is dit gewoonlik die mense wie se gut die meeste ongesteld is en hulle microbiome is die meeste deficient van variety and species. En meeste van hulle, omdat hulle jy weet hierdie anxieties ervaar, they are on comfort food, so hulle is geneig om die slegte bakterieë baie meer te voer met die refined carbs and sugars en dan die kolonies van die gesonde bakterieë nie baie goed behandel of aanspoor nie. So vir meeste van daai gevalle begin ek met die gut en microbiome restoration en ons kry in vele gevalle kry ek dit reg om hulle éventueel van hulle chemiese antidepressante af te kry en ons kry hulle op bietjie meer natuurlike neurotransmitters, die GABA, lithium, rhodiola, ashwagandha en daai klas van goed wat dan vir hulle 'n vervanging of 'n plaasvervanger is wat nie al die neeweffekte het nie.
Ons sê net weer daai hulp se name wat jy gesê het. Jy sê dit net stadiger. Ashwagandha.
Ja, ashwagandha, want hy is ook baie goed in terme van die general hormone balance. GABA, lithium, rhodiola, 5-HTP, en dan is daar ook 'n paar van die aminosure wat ek sal bysit in daai geval.
Okay. En dit bring 'n permanente oplossing van depressie.
Wel dit doen, want as ons dan ook die dieet verander en ons begin om meer probiotic foods te eet wat dan die gut restoration kan bly voer, want dit help nie ons doen 'n microbiome restoration en dan gaan hulle aan en hulle eet weer die verkeerde kos nie, want die microbiomes, they need food in order to grow and flourish. So die grootste probleem is as ons 'n microbiome restoration doen en hulle bly nie compliant op 'n gesonde dieet nie, dan bly die microbiome nie gesond nie. So dit is presies wat hy in sy praatjie van gepraat het, is dat jy kan die implantings doen. Jy kan 'n microbiome restoration implant doen byvoorbeeld, but if you don't actually care for it, if you don't care for the lawn, then it cannot survive.
Okay. En die regte dieet is maar die vars vrugte en die groente en die vesel,
majority plant-based diet. So met wanneer daar mense is wat vir my sê, maar ek kan nie sonder my vleisie nie. Jy hoef nie op te hou vleisie eet nie, solank jy seker maak jy doen 'n organiese kwaliteit, 'n grass-fed, grass-finished. Kan jy jou vleisie eet en eet dit net in die regte ratio. Soos vir my kankerpasiënte sal ek in 'n 20-80% ratio eet En vir die normale mense sal ek sê 'n 30-70% ratio. En as jy dan nou na die palm van jou hand kyk, dan kan jy vir hulle baie mooi sê, so jou vleisie kan nie groter as die palm van jou hand wees nie, dis 30% van jou bord. Met ander woorde, die ander 70% is dan wat in die res van jou bord kom, so 2/3. Want dit help hulle ook om dan te kan bepaal wat is hulle volumes, want meeste mense ooreet en meeste mense kou nie. So dis daai opleiding van verstaan hoe dit werk. As jy nie goed kou nie, gaan jy nie die ensieme kan aktiveer wanneer die kos in jou maagie beland nie. As jy nie genoeg maagsure het nie, gaan jy nie die kos kan afbreek nie, but you also cannot deal with incoming pathogens, want dis jou maagsuur se job is to kill all bacterial pathogens that are not welcome in your body. En op hierdie stadium in my groep pasiënte sal ek sê, ek sit seker met 'n 70% raam van mense wat low stomach acids het, wat net nie sufficient stomach acids en pepsin het nie.
Okay. Wat sê van julle ander? Laat ek bietjie hoor. Ursula, Christel, Philip, Celia.
Jan, al wat ek kan sê ook is veral wat ek nou al baie gesien het, mense wat baie aan mekaar blaasinfeksies en nier-related infeksies kry. As jy die oomblik wat jy vir hulle probifloras en goeie goed gee, dan en natuurlik water drink, dan klaar dit net eenvoudig op. Ons het 'n ou tannie gehad hier wat in die ouete huis was. Hulle het vir haar 2 kursusse antibiotika direk na mekaar gegee en dis seker heel waarskynlik daai wat julle nou van gepraat het of Philip van gepraat het. En toe slaan sy sere uit op haar maag. Sy het dit nie eers gesien nie. Toe sal 2 sere op haar maag. En toe kry ons haar gelukkig voor sy weer dokter toe gaan. Toe het ons net maar vir haar gesê sy moet 'n bietjie haar pH reg kry en sy het baie sweeties geëet natuurlik, soos wat die ou mense maar doen. Ons het haar probiflora gegee en daai petersilie tee en dit het onmiddellik begin beter word en dis net weg. So dit wys jou net die gut flora is so belangrik, maar dit sal wonderlik wees om te weet wat kan 'n mens alles gee. Ek hoor wat is die vroutjie se naam wat nou gepraat het net voor ons wat
Anina.
Ja, sy het 'n baie goeie kennis van wat 'n mens kan gee, want my dogter ons het ook agtergekom, sy's nou 29 en sy het vir 2 jaar na sy geswat het sy eers op 'n boot gewerk en toe het sy geopereer en mense het nie 'n idee wat sy profound effek het daai adventures van die kinders op hulle maag, hulle gut nie, want hulle eet nie reg nie, hulle het nogal stres en op hierdie stadium, ek het vir Celine op 'n stadium gestuur vir colon hydroterapie. Ek sal graag wil hoor wat dink die ander mense van dit ook. En toe het hulle vir haar so lekker vloeibare probiotic gegee om te drink en dit was onmiddellik beter. Maar dit sal wonderlik wees, soos psyllium weet ek ook is goed en ek het nou nie geweet ashwagandha is ook goed nie, so dit sal wonderlik wees om te weet wat se bronne van goed as kombinasie vir 'n goeie diversity soos die ou sê, kan 'n mens vir iemand gee om basies 'n hele nuwe gut oor te bou.
Ja.
Mag ek, Jan?
Ja.
Hi Celia, dis is mos Celia, nee?
Ja, Celia.
Ja, dankie.
Celia, eerstens net op die
Ja, ekskuus,
kronies.
dat ek hier invoer gou, maar ek iewers is seker of my syne is nie lekker nie, maar ek weet nie of die ander sukkel daarmee nie, maar ek kry nie altyd almal eintlik gehoor nie. Jy weet, ons wil 'n breek op na 'n rukkie.
Okay, praat maar net bietjie harder. Ek gaan die klank 'n bietjie harder sit. Miskien sal dit help, want onthou die klank word hier beheer. Okay, praat maar Anina.
Celia, goed, so ek wil net teruggaan na die die kroniese blaasinfeksies of die gereelde blaasinfeksies, want dit is 'n baie common ding. Ja, ek werk met liquid floras, ek werk glad nie met kapsules nie. rede hoekom is dat in die kapsules, miskien was al daai kultuurtjies lewendig toe hulle in daai kapsule ingegaan het, maar nadat hy in warehousing en distribution beland het en dan op 'n winkelrak beland het, is daar baie min van hulle wat nog lewendig is. So I much prefer working with a liquid flora. En wat ek dan met baie van die mense doen vir die blaasinfeksies, veral die vrouens, is ek laat hulle dit dilute met water en inspuit in die vaginale kanaal in, sodat ons dan nou daai hele restoration ook in daai kanaal doen. Dit neem onmiddellik al die inflammasie uit die blaas uit. Dan die ander vraagie wat jy gehad het in terme van to restore a entire gut. Dit is miskien 'n bespreking wat ek met jou kan hê vir jou kind, jy weet, as jy wil net voorstelletjies maak en dan kan jy van daar af kyk hoe ons haar ook kan help.
Ag, baie dankie Anina, ek waardeer dit verskriklik. Ek sal jou 'n likeie gee, hoor. Baie dankie.
Groot plesier.
Okay, so wat sê Ursula? Is jy daar, Ursula?
Alle dokkies. Wat ek gewoonlik doen, ek dink nou net so vinnig
Sit net
aan
Tog Ursula, sit net jou video af.
okay. So.
Hy maak.
Okay.
Ja, daar.
As ek net dink aan wat ek gewoonlik gebruik vir gut flora, dit hang af van ou se budget. Ek stel gewoonlik voor dat hulle GI Pro Balance gebruik, wat baie hoog is in pre en probiotics. Elke skeersak het 1.5 biljoen pre en probiotics, is 'n poeier vorm.
Jy raak nou 'n bietjie weg.
Ekskuus tog, dok. Ek dink is maar 'n bietjie opvangs hierso. En as hulle nie GI Pro kan bekostig nie, dan help ek hulle om 'n kombucha plantjie te groei en dan maak ek maar voorstelle soos kool, gegiste kool, daai tipe van ding. Maar ek sit hulle ook op 'n goeie mineraalwater. Ek het al baie goeie deurbraak gekry met mense wat ordentlik goeie mineraalwater drink. Want baie mense dink hulle kan hulle water kook en goedjies ingooi en ons het ongelooflike patogene en goeters opgetel. Ek het met 'n 9-jarige dogtertjie gesit laasweek wat soveel varkvleisparasiete en gemors in haar gut het en die kind, toe ons al begin detox met die lewer, toe begin sy opgooi en die ma is hysteries. Ek sê van maar dit moet uit, dit moet iewers uitkom. Maar wat ek ook vind is mense is oor die algemeen gedehidreerd. En natuurlik die goed wat die inflammasie veroorsaak, wat die gut flora in elk geval opvreet, stel ek voor alle witmeelprodukte, alle suikers moet hulle vermy, maar mense luister nie wat jy vir hulle sê nie. So partykeer sukkel ons om deurbraak te kry as gevolg van mense se slegte eetgewoontes. Ek moet sê hierdie nuwe green coffee bean wat Dok vir my gestuur het, wat ek die mense op het, ek sit hulle almal op intermittent fasting, om die inflammasie uit die liggaam uit te kry van sommer 6:00, 7:00 in die aand tot 12:00 die volgende dag. Maar ek help hulle om dit uit te stel bietjie en dan net 2 etes te eet 'n dag naby aan mekaar. Dit help nogal geweldig ook daarvoor. Ja, as ek so of the cuff dink, en natuurlik al Dok se tekture, vir al die verskillende goeders. Ek probeer maar die budget bietjie balanseer.
Ja. Dankie. Ja, ek dink daar's 'n paar goed wat ons bymekaar kry. Ons het nou die water ding ook. Ek dink dit is nogal die ander belangrike ding. En dan natuurlik wat sy nou genoem het, die coffee bean extract, die green coffee bean extract, het leptin in, wat 'n natuurlike medisyn vroeër stuur na jou brein toe dat jy versadig is, so dit help ook 'n bietjie. Maar ja, en die fermented veggies, dit glo ek ook aan, so daar is baie van dit, die kefir, ek drink elke oggend 'n bietjie, nie elke oggend nie, maar die meeste oggende bietjie, ek maak vir my 'n smoothie met amazi, wat dikmelk is, en dan die cherries, ek koop gevries cherries want jy kry nie vars cherries hierdie tyd van die jaar nie of berries, blueberries en so. So ek vind dat dit ook goed werk en natuurlik dat die olies. Alright, so wat sê Philip, het jy nog ietsie wat jy vir ons wil bydra? Ursula het Ristel het ongelukkig nie 'n mikrofoon nie. Ek dink sy moet vir haar een kry. Want sy sit in Pretoria en sy het ook 'n baie sterk praktyk daar sodat sy ons ook 'n bietjie kan help en bydra kan lewer. Philip,
Ja, ekskuus, ek het nou baie ek dink my opvangs van my internet opvangs was nou bietjie swak. So ek het nou 'n klomp goed wat ek nie kon hoor nie en so ek sal nog weer later kan ons weer daaroor gesels. Ek wil net gou by julle hoor wat
Philip, laat ek sê dat onthou dis op die recording, so die recording sal reg wees.
Okay, dis pragtig, ja.
Ek sal die recording weer opsit.
Ja, want ek kon ook nie, is daar ook nie 'n direkte link van hierdie ander ou wat gepraat het nie, want mens kan nie lees wat, jy weet, wat die ou daar op die goeders praat nie. Vir ons kyk of jy nie 'n direct link kan dit is miskien sien waar
Hy's op YouTube, hoor. Hy is
Ja,
op
hy is op
YouTube. Daar's geweldig baie van sy goed op YouTube. Ek het al baie van dit gekyk.
Okay, baie dankie Anina. Wat ek wil weet by julle slimme ouentjies is dat die gebruik van voedsels wat kyk soos daai iets wat binne seisoen en ook lokaal gekweek word, want ek kom so agter met wat die ander ou nou net toe gepraat het van die feit van kosse van ander plekke of omdat dit lyk vir my as ek het nou verstaan het dat jou microbiome eintlik basies plaaslik werk en ek het dit nou al verskeie plekke gehoor van dat jy moet lokaal eet, met ander woorde alles lokaal gemaak, natuurlik nou uit die aard van die saak uit organies en dan ook, maar alles wat meer in seisoen lokaal is, wat voel vir my ook 'n baie belangrike ding en dit nagelang van wat die ou ook nog gesê het van jy kan nou nie goed gaan eet wat noodwendig in 'n dieet wat ewers uit Amerika uitkom hulle sê vir jou jy moet nou dit en dit eet nie.
Ja, nee, ek dink dis baie belangrik. Ek en jy het mos ook daaroor gepraat oor die feit dat jy weet die goed wat in die grond groei en dat die vrugte wat voor die tyd op die rak kom en al ons vrugte word in was gedoop voor hulle uit die pakhuis uitgaan om hulle langer raklewe te gee en ek het 'n vermoede dat daai ook, jy weet die want onthou daai microbiome groei ook op die vrugte. Dit is in die pakket. Dis hoekom jy die skil moet eet want dis deel van die pakket van daai microbiome en want dit sit op net soos daar op ons vel, sit daar op die vel van die vrug sit daar ook daai microbiome en dis baie belangrik. En dis waarom dit belangriker is ook as ons kom praat van organiese goed en dit wat 'n ou self kan kweek, wat 'n mens eintlik maar in gedagte moet hou vir die toekoms en jy het ook vandag my noem bietjie van daai persoon wat jy gesê het wat met jou gepraat het oor die grond en so. Miskien moet ons hom een aand vra om bietjie met ons te praat. Philip, hoor jy my?
Ja, maar jy het ook weer opgebreek, ja. Ja, ja, ek sal by hom hoor of hy so iets wil doen, maar dat hy kan opkom, baie interessante ou wat dit nou doen, wat spesifiek ook hoe om die dinge te herstel, ons grond te herstel, want ons grond is nie voedsaam nie, jy weet, jy moet hom herstel, maar ja, nee, ekskuus, ek wil nie tyd mors daarmee, ja. Ek sal 'n bietjie hoor.
Okay, nee goed. Nee, die eerste keer wat ek te doen gekry het met grondeet was met Ruben Jordan, daai Messiaanse Jood wat die boek geskryf het, the Bible Diet, wat Crohn's disease gehad het en dat een van die redes hoekom hy gesond geword het, hulle vir hom gesê hy moet goeie grond eet want daar is miljoene microbiotics in die grond, jy weet. So in 'n mens bietjie meer in die grond krap en as jy 'n tuintjie het en daai nie al die goed afspoel nie, moenie die bakterieë doodspuit met gif en so nie. Ja, groei organies. OK, ek dink as daar nog iemand is wat 'n bydrae wil lewer, is jy baie welkom. Andersins gaan ons klaarmaak want ons is nou al wat 2 ure aan die gang.
Jan, as ek net vinnig gou ietsie weer kan vra. Hydroterapie, as mens nou die kolon hidroterapie doen, is dit nie 'n goeie, hoe sal ek sê, drastiese behandeling, of is daar redelike goeie ander goed wat mens kan doen om iemand se kolon, sê maar impaksies en daai tipe van ding te verwyder nie? Soos Anina ook gesê het, al die goedjies wat mens doen, dit kan afvat, of wat dink julle van die kolon hidroterapie?
Ek dink as dit onder toesig gedoen word en mense wat weet hoe om dit te doen, dan kan dit goed werk, maar daarna moet jy onmiddellik weer daai microbiome herstel, want baie van dit gaan nou verlore gaan. Wat die colon hydrotherapie doen is dit maak al daai in die peristalsis al daai aanpaksels los. So dit maak dit weer mooi werk. Ja, ek dink dit is belangrik dat 'n ou daarna moet. Maar ek dink, jy weet, dis heeltemal drasties daai. Ek dink jy kan ook dit doen deur 'n gewone colon cleanse en 'n liver cleanse. As dit nou nie werk nie, dan moet 'n ou maar daarna toe gaan. En dan ook natuurlik met goeie bakterie aanvullings, soos Anina vir ons gesê het, wat lewendig is, lewendige kultuur. Dis die belangrike. Ek wil net een ding hier noem, hierdie nebulizertjie van ons maak nie vriendelike bakterieë dood nie. Ek glo nie met die hydroperoxide nie, want en onthou wat ons verlede week gesê het, en julle dalk weer daai video kyk, ek het hom nog nie opgesit nie, maar ek sal hom opsit weer, waar of die een wat ons voor het gepraat het, ja, van die biofilms wat die slegte bakterieë vorm, en dan word dit opgebreek deur hierdie HP, en die byprodukte van HP is net water, so dit kan nie skade doen aan vriendelike bakterieë nie. En natuurlik suurstof en ozonbehandelings, jou vriendelike bakterieë kan daarmee saamleef. Hulle is nie, maar waar die slegte bakterieë natuurlik benadeel word deur suurstof, want hulle kan nie in 'n suurstofryke omgewing kan hulle lewe nie. OK, julle moet 'n lekker Sondag hê en 'n geseënde week, en die mense wie se nebuliseerdertjies is op pad. Anina, ek sal joune maandag vir jou afsit, en Celia, joune is in die pos, en dan is daar nog net Gerdas en so, maar ons gaan weer 'n nuwe besending kry. So as julle wil bestel, moet julle my volgende week laat weet, want die goed gaan baie vinnig uitverkoop. Ek weet daar's 'n groot aanvraag op die oomblik in die wêreld vir nebulisering. Is snaaks hoe vinnig 'n ding versprei deur social media, maar ek dink daar's baie mense, en dan wil ons ook van die suurstof, daar dat jy op jou vingers se klips kry, wat mense hulle suurstof kan toets, veral nou in die COVID vlaag wat nou weer losgebars het. En dan kan jy jou suurstof monitor ook wanneer jy nebuliseer. Nou nog iemand? Klaar. OK, julle moet 'n lekker aand hê.
Hey, ook Jan, lekker slaap.
Dankie almal.
Baie dankie almal.
Dankie almal, lekker aand.